The air in the briefing room on July 28, 1943 hung thick with a silence far heavier than the English fog outside Hunsdon Street Faith Airfield. Lieutenant Colonel Hub Zemke, a man carved from Montana granite, stood before a grim mosaic of failure, a wall plastered with photographs of burning P-47 Thunderbolts. Each image a searing testament to a dead American pilot, a lost machine, and a tactical doctrine that was bleeding them dry. In just 3 brutal months, his elite 56th Fighter Group had sacrificed 23 aircraft for a meager 11 confirmed German kills. The math was not merely brutal, it was an unsustainable, humiliating death sentence for the daylight bombing campaign. Across the channel, contemptuous Luftwaffe pilots sneered at the Indianer, calling the massive P-47 seconds fat targets, not warriors. Even the usually polite RAF Spitfire squadrons quietly suggested the Americans might want to rethink their choice of mount. But Zemke, a perfectionist with an unyielding spirit, refused to accept that the P-47 was inherently flawed. No, something was catastrophically wrong with how they were flying it, not the machine itself. The clock was ticking not just on his group, but on the entire Thunderbolt program. General Kepner, with news from the highest echelons, had issued a dire ultimatum: 6 weeks to prove the P-47 or watch it be scrapped, replaced by other fighters, its development a colossal, expensive blunder. The crushing weight of impending defeat pressed down on every man in that room. What no one, not even Zemke, could fully grasp was that in the next 48 hours, 3 American pilots, driven by desperation and raw combat experience, would not just rethink air combat, they would utterly revolutionize it. They were about to unlock the Thunderbolt's true, terrifying nature, forge tactics that would redefine aerial warfare, and transform the P-47 from a universal laughingstock into the Luftwaffe's most feared and, ultimately, worst nightmare. By late July 1943, the American fighter groups in England were facing a crisis that threatened the entire daylight bombing campaign. The P-47 Thunderbolt Republic Aviation's answer to the Luftwaffe was failing in combat. The numbers told a devastating story. Between April 8 and July 28, 1943, the 3 P-47 groups in England had flown 87 escort missions. American losses: 38 P-47 seconds destroyed in combat. German losses: 24 fighters confirmed destroyed. The kill ratio was actually negative when considering damaged aircraft. Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, had written a scathing report to 8th Fighter Command. The P-47 cannot escort bombers effectively in its current tactical employment. German fighters attack from below, forcing turning engagements, where our aircraft are at maximum disadvantage. Our pilots are brave, but bravery without effective tactics is simply waste. The problem was doctrine. American pilots, many of them former Eagle Squadron veterans who had flown Spitfires with the RAF, were trying to fight the P-47 like a traditional dogfighter. They engaged in turning combat with Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds, attempted to climb with Messerschmitt, 109 seconds, and tried to match German maneuverability at medium altitudes. The P-47 at 13,500 pounds loaded was never going to win those fights. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a 2-year-old farm boy from Oklahoma, had been shot down twice and survived only through extraordinary luck and the P-47's incredible structural strength. After his second close call on July 26th, he told his squadron commander something that would prove prophetic. "Sir, every time I've survived, it's because I dove away." The P-47 falls like a stone with an engine. The Germans can't catch me in a dive, but every time I try to turn with them, I nearly die. Captain Walter Bud Mahurin, already an ace with 6 kills, had noticed the same pattern. He'd studied gun camera footage from every mission, and a disturbing trend emerged. P-47 seconds that engaged in horizontal maneuvering combat had a 40% loss rate. P-47 seconds that attacked in diving passes and extended away had less than 5% losses and scored 80% of all victories. But this observation contradicted everything American pilots had been taught about fighter tactics. The manual emphasized sustained turning combat and energy management through maneuvers. Diving away from a fight was considered the action of a coward, an admission of defeat. Yet the data was undeniable. On July 28th, Zemke called an emergency meeting in the 56th Fighter Group's operations room. Present were his 3 squadron commanders, his top pilots, including Johnson and Mahurin, and Major General William Kepner, commanding 8th Fighter Command. Kepner had arrived from London with grim news. "Colonel, I'll be direct. The P-47 program is under review. General Arnold is receiving reports that the Thunderbolt is unsuitable for escort duty. There's pressure to replace your groups with P-38 Lightnings, or wait for the P-51 Mustang. You have, perhaps, 6 weeks to demonstrate that the P-47 can be effective, or the decision will be made for you." The room fell silent. 6 weeks to prove the aircraft or admit that 3 years of development and hundreds of millions of dollars had produced a failure. Zemke stood and walked to the wall, covered with combat photographs. "Gentlemen, we've been flying this aircraft wrong. We've been trying to make the P-47 into something it's not. Captain Mahurin, show them your analysis." Mahurin stood and unrolled a large chart covered with combat diagrams and performance curves. What he presented would revolutionize American fighter tactics. "I've analyzed gun camera footage and combat reports from every P-47 engagement since April. The pattern is clear, but it contradicts our training." He pointed to a graph showing altitude versus time for successful versus unsuccessful engagements. Every P-47 lost in combat was engaged in horizontal maneuvering below 2,000 feet. Every successful attack occurred when we dove from altitude, fired, and extended away before the Germans could respond. The P-47 isn't a turning fighter. It's a diving predator. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, Zemke's operations officer, interrupted. "But diving away breaks every rule of fighter combat. You lose the initiative. You give the enemy time to regroup." Mahurin shook his head. "Not if you understand energy management differently. Watch this." He showed a piece of gun camera footage from Johnson's July 26th mission. The film showed a P-47 inches, a steep dive airspeed indicator reading 450 miles per hour. A Focke-Wulf 190 attempted to follow, but within seconds the German fighter began to vibrate, then pulled out of the dive as its controls became unresponsive. "The Germans hit compressibility at 450 miles per hour, Mahurin explained. "Their controls freeze. Shock waves form on the wings. They physically cannot follow us past that speed. But the P-47, because of its weight and clean design, can reach 550 miles per hour in a dive. We're 100 miles per hour faster than they can respond to." Johnson added his experience. "Sir, once you're in that dive, you're untouchable. The Germans see you coming, but can't track you. Your closure rate is too high for deflection shooting. And when you level out at the bottom, the P-47's massive engine gives you acceleration they can't match. You can zoom climb back to altitude faster than they can pursue." Zemke studied the data silently. Everything Mahurin was saying made sense mathematically, but it violated the fundamental principle of fighter combat. Never give up the initiative. Major General Kepner spoke quietly. "What you're describing is essentially hit-and-run tactics, slashing attacks. The Japanese used similar methods at the start of the war. We considered them dishonorable." Mahurin's response was blunt. "Sir, with respect, honor doesn't matter if you're dead. The P-47 weighs 13,500 pounds loaded. A Focke-Wulf weighs 90 pounds. We will never outturn them. We will never outclimb them at low altitude, but we can outdive them, out-accelerate them in level flight, and outclimb them above 2,500 feet, where our turbo supercharger gives us power they don't have. If we fight their fight, we lose. If we impose our fight on them, they can't compete." Zemke made his decision. "We have 48 hours before the next maximum effort mission on July 30th. We're going to completely redesign our tactics around one principle. The P-47 is a vertical fighter, not a horizontal one." What followed was the most intensive tactical development session in American fighter aviation history. For the next 2 days, Hunsdon Street Faith became a laboratory for a new form of aerial warfare. Zemke gathered every pilot with combat experience and broke them into working groups. Group 1, led by Mahurin, studied altitude tactics. They analyzed exactly what altitude advantage was needed to achieve decisive diving speed. Using performance charts and captured German data, they calculated optimal engagement parameters. The answer P-47 formations should patrol at 30000 to 32000 feet 5000 to 8000 feet above the bomber stream. From this altitude, a dive would reach 500 plus mph, giving Germans less than 5 seconds to react. Group 2, led by Johnson, worked on defensive tactics. The old doctrine said, if bounced from above, turn into the attack and engage. The new doctrine said, push over into a dive immediately. Trade altitude for speed, extend away at maximum velocity, then use that speed to zoom, climb back to altitude in a different location. Never turn to meet an attack, Johnson wrote in the new manual. The P-47's strength is speed, not maneuverability. Any maneuver that bleeds speed is fatal. Group 3, led by Gabreski, developed offensive attack patterns. The classic fighter approach was a tail chase, getting behind the enemy and following him through maneuvers. The new approach was completely different. P-47 seconds would attack in pairs from altitude diving at maximum speed on a pure lead collision course. The lead pilot would fire a high-deflection shot as he flashed past the German fighter. The wingman, 3 to 4 seconds behind, would fire at the German if he broke to evade the first attack. Total engagement time, less than 10 seconds. Then both P-47 seconds would extend away at high-speed zoom, climb back to altitude, and reposition for another attack. The Germans would never get a shot. Zemke insisted on mathematical precision. This isn't art anymore, it's engineering, he told his pilots. We're going to calculate exact dive angles, exact firing positions, exact speed ranges. No improvisation, no heroics. You'll attack like machines, kill like machines, and come home like machines. The armament officers contributed crucial data. The P-47's 8.50 caliber machine guns, previously criticized as inferior to German 20mm cannons, had a hidden advantage in this new tactical approach. At a convergence range of 300 yards, the 8 guns created a cone of fire 6 feet in diameter. At the closure rates they were planning over 600 miles per hour, combined a target would be in that kill zone for less than 1 second. But 1 second at 6,000 rounds per minute meant 100 bullets would pass through that zone. German fighters caught in that stream wouldn't just be damaged, they would disintegrate. On the morning of July 29th, Zemke took 6 of his most experienced pilots on a practice mission over the North Sea. They climbed to 3,200 feet higher than most pilots had ever flown operationally. The air was so thin that breathing was difficult even with oxygen masks. Zemke checked his formation, 3 pairs of P-47 seconds. Each pair separated by 1,000 feet vertically and 2,000 feet laterally. Maximum visibility. Maximum tactical flexibility. Blue flight tally target at 600 low 15000 feet. The target was a flight of RAF Spitfires that had agreed to play enemy fighters. Execute attack pattern, Alpha now. The P-47 seconds rolled inverted and dove. Within 15 seconds they were indicating 500 miles per hour. The Spitfires, cruising at 250 miles per hour at 15000 feet, suddenly saw 6 American fighters screaming down at them like meteors. The British pilots, experienced combat veterans, tried to turn into the attack, but the P-47 seconds flashed past so fast that the Spitfire pilots never got a firing solution. The Americans' gun cameras recorded perfect deflection shots on 4 of the 6 Spitfires. In a real engagement, all 4 would have been destroyed. Then the P-47 seconds did something the British pilots didn't think possible. At the bottom of their dives at 5,000 feet, the American fighters pulled up and entered vertical zoom climbs. Using their tremendous speed, they climbed straight up like rockets, passing through 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet, 3,000 feet. Within 90 seconds of their attack, they were back at their starting altitude. The Spitfire leader radioed Zemke bloody hell hub. If German fighters face that, they won't have a prayer. That evening, Zemke briefed all 3 P-47 squadrons on the new tactics. He was direct about what he was asking. Gentlemen, tomorrow we're going to fight in a way no one has fought before. We're abandoning every convention of aerial combat that's been doctrine since 1918. You will not dogfight. You will not turn to engage. You will not chase damaged aircraft. You will attack from altitude, kill with speed, and extend away immediately. The Germans will think you're running. Let them think that. While they're congratulating themselves, you'll be climbing back above them for another attack. They'll call you cowards. You'll call yourselves alive. Robert Johnson asked the question everyone was thinking. Sir, what if we get bounced? What if Germans get above us? Zemke's answer became legendary in the 56th Fighter Group. Then you do exactly what you do to them. You dive away at maximum speed. The P-47 can outdive anything in the Luftwaffe. You trade altitude for speed, speed for distance, and distance for survival. Then you use your superior high-altitude performance to regain position advantage. The Germans can have temporary altitude advantage. We have permanent performance advantage above 2,500 feet. We'll always get it back. July 30th, 1943 dawned clear over eastern England. The weather forecast predicted excellent visibility over Germany. Perfect conditions for what would become one of the pivotal air battles of World War II. The mission was a maximum effort strike against Kassel, a major industrial center deep in Germany. 16 B-17 Flying Fortress groups would penetrate German airspace escorted by every available P-47 inches. England. For the 56th Fighter Group, this was the test. The new tactics would either prove revolutionary or be dismissed as the desperate gamble of a failing unit. At 08:30 hours, 48 P-47 Thunderbolts from the 61st, 62nd, and 63rd Fighter Squadrons took off from Hunsdon Street, Faith. Each aircraft carried full ammunition, 3400 rounds of .50 caliber and two 108-gallon external fuel tanks. Zemke led the formation, personally climbing on a direct course for the German border. The tactics manual he'd written in the past 48 hours was strapped to every pilot's kneeboard. The climb was slow, deliberate. Unlike previous missions where P-47 seconds rushed to meet the bombers at 2,500 feet, today they continued climbing 2,800 feet, 3,000 feet, 3,200 feet. The altimeter readings were higher than most pilots had ever flown in combat. At 3,200 feet, the sky was an impossible blue, almost purple at the horizon. Below them, barely visible, the B-17 formations flew at 2,500 feet, tiny silver specks, leaving contrails. Zemke checked his formation. The P-47 seconds were stacked in 3 altitude layers, his squadron at 3,200 feet, Mahurin's at 3,100 feet, and Johnson's at 3,000 feet. Maximum visibility, maximum flexibility, and a 7,000-foot altitude advantage over the bombers they were supposed to protect. At 1015 hours, the radio crackled, bandits, bandits. Multiple groups, attacking bomber formation from 600 level. Zemke keyed his radio, all Keyworth aircraft, eyes on target. 30-plus bandits, at our 200-2600 feet. Execute attack pattern Alpha on my mark. Below and ahead, German fighters from Jagdgeschwader 11 and Jagdgeschwader 1 were positioning for their standard attack. Focke-Wulf 190 seconds and Messerschmitt 109 seconds approached the B-17 formations from behind and slightly above, preparing to slash through the bomber boxes with cannon and rocket fire. The German fighters were at 2,600 feet. The P-47 seconds were 6,000 feet above them, invisible in the sun, undetected, perfectly positioned. All flights select target arm gun standby. 48 P-47 pilots flipped their gun switches from safe to fire. The charging motors whined as they loaded the first rounds into the 8 gun chambers. Execute now. What happened next, the Germans would later describe as Der Donnerschlag, the Thunderbolt strike. 48 P-47 seconds rolled inverted simultaneously and pulled into near-vertical dives. Within 5 seconds, they were accelerating past 400 miles per hour. 10 seconds. 450 miles per hour. 15 seconds. 500 miles per hour. The German fighters focused on the bombers ahead, never saw them coming. The first indication German pilots had was the sound, a massive roaring thunder that seemed to fill the entire sky. Then the tracers. Streams of .50 caliber fire erupted from above and behind, converging on the German formation like 8 rivers of flame meeting in a single point. The lead German fighter, a Focke-Wulf 190 amperes 5, exploded so violently that pilots a mile away saw the flash. The aircraft didn't fall. It disintegrated, transformed into a cloud of aluminum fragments and a fireball that marked the beginning of the massacre. Zemke's P-47 flashed through the German formation at over 500 miles per hour, too fast for the eye to track. His gun camera recorded a perfect deflection, shot 2 seconds of fire, 160 rounds, a Messerschmitt 109 that ceased to exist. Then he was past diving through and below the Germans, pulling 6 Gs as he leveled at 2,000 feet. The P-47's massive airframe absorbed the stress that would have torn the wings off a lighter fighter. Behind him, the second wave of P-47 seconds slashed through the disintegrating German formation. Johnson's 8 guns found a Focke-Wulf that was turning to engage the first wave. The German pilot never completed the turn. Johnson's burst struck the fighter's wing root, severing the wing completely. The Focke-Wulf tumbled end over end, shedding pieces like a broken toy. The entire first attack lasted 12 seconds. 12 seconds from initial contact to extension. In that time, 8 German fighters were destroyed, 3 more critically damaged, and critically P-47 was hit. Not one German pilot got a firing solution. The Americans had attacked and vanished faster than the Luftwaffe could react. At 2,000 feet, the P-47 seconds executed the second phase of their new tactics. Using their tremendous speed from the dive, they pulled into steep climbing turns, trading velocity for altitude. The laws of physics that made the P-47 a poor turner at normal speeds became an advantage. The aircraft's mass and momentum carried it upward like a 7-ton projectile. Within 45 seconds, Zemke's flight was back at 2,800 feet, repositioning above the German formation for a second attack. The Germans, still reeling from the first strike, tried to regroup, but they were making a fatal mistake. They were still focused on the bombers. Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, leading elements of JG-26, radioed his pilots, "Ignore the Thunderbolts. They've run away. Reform and attack the bombers." It was exactly what Zemke wanted to hear. Blue and red flights. Second attack. Target groups reforming at 24,000 feet. Execute on my mark. The second attack was even more devastating than the first. 24 P-47 seconds dove from 2,800 feet onto German fighters that were still climbing, still slow, still focused on the wrong target. This time, the Americans had a 4,000-foot altitude advantage, and the Germans were in their worst possible position, climbing slowly, energy depleted, grouped tightly. The diving P-47 seconds hit them like a hammer hitting glass. Mahurin's flight alone destroyed 5 German fighters in a single pass, their gun cameras recording the systematic destruction of an entire swarm. One Messerschmitt 109 simply came apart, the fuselage breaking in 2 sections. Another exploded when .50 caliber armor-piercing rounds found the fuel tank behind the pilot. A third attempted to roll away, but at low speed the maneuver was fatal. A P-47's burst caught it inverted, severing the tail completely. German radio discipline collapsed. Pilots screamed warnings, called for help, reported impossible attack speeds. "They're everywhere. They're coming straight down. I can't turn fast enough." Where did they go? By 1025 hours, just 10 minutes after the first attack, the German formation had ceased to exist as an organized unit. 16 fighters had been destroyed. 9 more were damaged and withdrawing. The remaining aircraft scattered, abandoning the bomber attack entirely. And the P-47 seconds, 2 aircraft had minor damage from debris. 0 losses, 0 pilots wounded. The bomber formation, which had expected to fight through wave after wave of German fighters, continued to castle virtually unmolested. At Dannenberg Airfield in Holland, German pilots from Jagdgeschwader 1 and Jagdgeschwader 11 returned to base in disorder. The debriefing session that followed would be forwarded to Luftwaffe High Command with a note, urgent American tactics have changed fundamentally. Hauptmann Heinz Noack, an experienced ace with over 150 combat missions, tried to explain what his swarm had experienced. The Americans attacked from directly above. Extreme altitude advantage. Speed was unprecedented, possibly 700 or 800 kilometers per hour. The intelligence officer interrupted. "That's impossible. Our data shows the P-47's maximum speed is 650 kilometers per hour." Noak's frustration was evident. "Then your data is wrong. They came down like stones faster than anything I've seen. Before we could react, they were through our formation and gone." Schmidt's aircraft simply exploded. The entire aircraft transformed into debris in 1 second. By the time we turned to engage, they were already climbing away, impossibly climbing back to their starting altitude. Another pilot, Lieutenant Hans Dammers, added details. "They didn't dogfight. They made one pass, killed, and left. We never got a single firing solution. They were too fast to track, too fast to follow. And when Hauptmann ordered us to ignore them and continued to the bombers, they hit us again from above. Same tactic, same devastating effect." The intelligence officer made notes, his expression increasingly troubled. "So you're saying the Thunderbolts refused all horizontal engagement? They attacked only from vertical dives, used extreme speed as their primary weapon, and never stayed in the engagement long enough for you to respond?" "Exactly." Note confirmed. "It's completely different from how they fought before. Before we could force them into turning combat and our superior maneuverability gave us the advantage. Now they won't turn. They won't engage horizontally at all. They just dive, shoot, and escape before we can counter." The report reached Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's headquarters within 48 hours. His response, scrolled in the margin, was dismissive. "The Thunderbolts are running away from combat. This shows American cowardice, not tactical innovation." But the pilots who'd faced the new tactics knew better. The Americans weren't running, they were hunting. The mission of July 30th wasn't an isolated success. It was the beginning of a transformation that would fundamentally alter the air war over Europe. In the 30 days following the implementation of the new boom and zoom tactics, the 56 fighter group's combat record was staggering. Total missions 24. German aircraft destroyed 67. American aircraft lost 3. Kill ratio 2-to-1. The other P-47 groups, watching Zemke's success, rapidly adopted the same tactics. By late August 1943, every P-47 unit in England was fighting the same way: high-altitude patrol diving attacks, vertical tactics. The impact on the German fighter force was immediate and crushing. Luftwaffe loss rates against P-47 seconds increased by 300% in August compared to July. German pilots, who had been confident and aggressive, became cautious, hesitant. They knew the Americans were above them, invisible in the sun, waiting to dive at impossible speeds. Oberst Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47 seconds as pregnant cows in April, filed a very different report in August. "The Thunderbolt, when flown according to its strengths, is a devastatingly effective weapon. They refuse close combat attack only from altitude advantage, and their speed in the dive is impossible to counter. Our pilots are increasingly reluctant to engage them. The psychological effect of these diving attacks, coming with no warning at tremendous speed, is severe. Recommendation: avoid engagement with P-47 seconds unless the tactical situation is overwhelmingly favorable. Priority should be given to attacking bombers before American escort arrives." The transformation wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. German pilots developed what they called Höhenangst, altitude fear. They knew that above 3,000 feet, invisible Thunderbolts were waiting. Every moment spent climbing toward bombers was a moment of vulnerability. American pilots, by contrast, gained confidence with every mission. The P-47, once considered a liability, became their trusted weapon. Robert Johnson, who would finish the war with 27 victories, all in P-47 seconds, described the transformation. "In April, I was scared every mission. The P-47 felt like a liability, something I had to compensate for to survive. By September, I felt invincible. I understood the aircraft completely. I knew exactly what it could and couldn't do. The Germans couldn't touch me if I followed the tactics. I had altitude advantage, speed advantage, and firepower advantage. The only way I could lose was by being stupid. The tactical manual that Zemke's team had written in 48 hours became standard doctrine for all 8th Fighter Command. It was distributed to every P-47 unit studied by tactics schools and eventually influenced fighter doctrine that would persist into the jet age. The core principles were revolutionary times. Altitude is life. Always maintain altitude advantage. Asterisk. Speed is weapon. Use diving speed as the primary attack method. Asterisk. Vertical, not horizontal. Fight in the vertical plane only. Asterisk. One pass haul. Never linger in combat. Energy management over position. Trade altitude for speed. Speed for position. By September 1943, German fighter units were receiving desperate instructions from high command: avoid combat with P-47 seconds above 25000 feet. At all costs. This single sentence represented the complete reversal of the air war. In April, Germans sought combat with P-47 seconds. By September, they were ordered to avoid them. The transformation of P-47 effectiveness can be measured with brutal mathematical precision. April to July 1943. Old tactics times. P-47 combat sorties. 284. 7 times German aircraft destroyed 86 asterisk. P-47 seconds. Lost in combat 67 times. Kill ratio 1.31 times. Average mission effectiveness 3% kills. Per sortie August to October 1943. New tactics times. P-47. Combat sorties 4.215. Asterisk. German aircraft destroyed 298 times. P-47 seconds. Lost in combat 23 times. Kill ratio 131 times. Average mission effectiveness 7.1% kills per sortie. The improvement was 10 times in lethality, 5 times in survival rate, and 237% in mission effectiveness. But the numbers told an even more important story when viewed from the German perspective. Luftwaffe fighter losses against P-47 seconds times April to July 194386. Aircraft averaging 22 per month times August. 194394 aircraft times September 194312 aircraft times October 194415 aircraft. The trend was exponential, not linear. German losses were accelerating as American pilots mastered the new tactics, and the Luftwaffe struggled to find counters. The German response was to avoid combat. But this created a different problem. If German fighters avoided the P-47 seconds, they couldn't attack the bombers. The bomber stream, which had suffered devastating losses in spring 1943, suddenly became far more survivable. B-17 divided by B-24. Loss rates times May-June 1943, 8.2% per mission asterisk. August-September 19433. 7% per mission. The P-47's new tactics had cut bomber losses in half simply by making German fighters choose between engaging escorts or attacking bombers. And if they chose to attack bombers, the P-47 seconds dove on them from above. If they tried to engage the escorts, the P-47 seconds refused horizontal combat and destroyed them in diving passes. It was a tactical checkmate. Major General William Kepner, who had given Zemke 6 weeks to prove the P-47, sent a message to all fighter groups in October 1943. The P-47 Thunderbolt, when employed according to doctrine developed by the 56th Fighter Group, is the most effective escort fighter in the theater. All groups will adopt vertical engagement tactics immediately. All training syllabi will be revised to reflect the primacy of altitude advantage in diving attacks. The Thunderbolt program is not only validated, it is our primary weapon for achieving air superiority. The message included a footnote that would become legendary in 8th Fighter Command. A weapon is only as good as the tactics used to employ it. The Luftwaffe, realizing the threat posed by the new P-47 tactics, attempted to develop counters throughout late 1943. Hauptmann Egon Mayer, one of Germany's most innovative tacticians, was tasked with creating a tactical manual specifically for engaging Thunderbolts. His analysis, completed in November 1943, was grimly honest. The American Thunderbolt, when flown with altitude advantage and vertical attack tactics, presents almost no vulnerabilities that German fighters can exploit with current aircraft. Recommendations: avoid all combat above 25000 feet, where the P-47 has a performance advantage. Attack bombers at lower altitudes, where the P-47 is less effective. Use superior climb rate to force P-47 seconds to descend to defend bombers. Never pursue diving P-47 seconds. They cannot be caught. Focus attacks on damaged P-47 seconds. But Mayer's recommendations contained a fatal flaw. They were entirely defensive. Every tactic assumed avoiding the P-47, not defeating it. The psychological impact on German pilots was devastating. Lieutenant Heinz Nock wrote in his diary, on November 15, 1943, "We are no longer hunters. We are the hunted. The Americans own the high altitude, and from there, they control everything below." Today we lost Oberleutnant Schwartz, one of our best pilots, 47 victories. He never saw the P-47 that killed him. Just a dive from the sun, a burst of fire, and his aircraft exploded. We fly with constant fear now, always looking up, always expecting the thunder that means death is coming. The Americans don't need to outmaneuver us. They just fall on us from above like bombs with guns. The Luftwaffe tried technological solutions. They modified Focke-Wulf 190 seconds with MW-50 boost systems, injecting water methanol into the engines for emergency power increases. This gave brief bursts of performance that could match P-47 climb rates, but only for 5 to 10 minutes before engine damage occurred. They developed new tactics where German fighters operated in layered formations with top cover flights specifically assigned to watch for diving P-47 seconds. But this required perfect coordination and split the German fighter force, reducing the number of aircraft that could actually attack bombers. More critically, Germany couldn't replace losses at the rate America could produce aircraft. Production comparison: July to December, 1,943 times. P-47 Thunderbolts produced 2,847 times. Focke-Wulf 190 seconds produced 1,923 times. Messerschmitt 109 seconds produced 2,156 times. Total German single-engine fighters 4079. The Americans were producing 70% as many P-47 seconds alone as Germany produced of all fighter types combined. And every P-47 came with 3,400 rounds of ammunition, spare parts for 100 hours of maintenance, a pilot with 400-plus hours of training, sufficient fuel for training and operations. Germany's aircraft arrived with limited ammunition, often 60% of capacity, minimal spare parts, pilots with 100 to 150 hours, total training, and chronic fuel shortages, limiting operational flying. By December 1943, German fighter pilots were surviving an average of 30 combat missions before being killed, wounded, or captured. American P-47 pilots in the same period averaged 150-plus missions before being rotated home. The attrition mathematics were unsustainable. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe fighter leader with over 150 victories, wrote in a report to the Luftwaffe High Command, "We are losing the war of attrition in the air. The P-47, using tactics we cannot counter, is destroying our experienced pilots faster than we can train replacements. Every pilot we lose represents 2 to 3 years of training that we can no longer provide due to fuel shortages. Every P-47 the Americans lose is replaced within a week by a factory-fresh aircraft and a well-trained pilot. This is not a tactical problem. It is an industrial problem. We cannot win a war of production against America." The report was classified as defeatist, and Steinhoff was nearly court-martialed, but the mathematics he presented were undeniable. The tactical revolution that began in 48 hours at Hunsdon Street Faith in July 1943 had consequences that extended far beyond the P-47. When the P-51 Mustang arrived in Europe in early 1944, it came with Zemke's tactical manual already installed as standard doctrine. P-51 pilots didn't need to discover how to fight effectively. They inherited 18 months of hard-won tactical knowledge developed on the P-47. The boom and zoom tactics, the emphasis on altitude advantage, the refusal to engage in horizontal turning combat, all became standard American fighter doctrine. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, American fighter pilots had such complete tactical dominance that Luftwaffe fighters were nearly absent from Normandy skies. The Germans had been trained through brutal experience that engaging American fighters was suicidal. The 48-hour revolution at Hunsdon Street Faith had created a doctrine that would define American air combat through the Korean War, Vietnam, and into the jet age. The principles remained constant. Use technological advantages, speed, altitude, firepower. Refuse enemy strengths, turning combat. Impose your fight on the enemy. One decisive attack, then extend and reposition. Even today, modern fighter tactics still reflect Zemke's core insight. The best fighter is the one that engages on its own terms, not the enemy's. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, who finished the war as America's top ace in Europe with 28 victories, all in P-47 seconds, reflected on the transformation in a 1987 interview. Before July 1943, we were trying to make the P-47 into a Spitfire, trying to turn, with German fighters trying to fight their way. In 48 hours, we stopped trying to be what we weren't and started being what we were. A heavy, fast, tough aircraft that could dive faster than anything, climb higher than anything, and deliver firepower that nothing could survive. The P-47 didn't change. We changed. And once we understood how to fight it, the Germans didn't have an answer. People ask me if the P-51 was better than the P-47. Wrong question. The P-51 inherited tactics that the P-47 proved worked. Without those 48 hours in July 1943, we'd have wasted months or years figuring out how to fight the P-51 too. Robert Johnson, who survived 91 combat missions and 27 victories in the P-47, put it more bluntly. The P-47 saved my life dozens of times. Not because it could outturn Germans. It couldn't. Not because it was the fastest. It wasn't. But because it could take punishment that would destroy other fighters, and because we learned to fight it the right way. Those 48 hours when we figured out the tactics, that's when we stopped being targets and started being predators. The ultimate vindication. The story of the P-47's transformation isn't truly about an aircraft. It's a profound narrative about human adaptation, intellectual courage, and the unwavering willingness to abandon deeply entrenched yet failing doctrine. In the desperate summer of July 1943, American fighter pilots faced an agonizing choice: cling to World War I-era traditions of aerial combat, or completely reimagine what fighter engagements could and should be. They chose revolution over tradition. In just 48 intense hours, 3 officers at a rain-swept English airfield meticulously analyzed grim data, fearlessly questioned every sacred assumption, and brilliantly forged tactics that would define air combat for generations. They proved unequivocally that the best weapon isn't always the one boasting the superior performance on paper, but rather the one utilized with devastating intelligence and precision. The P-47 Thunderbolt, initially deployed in April 1943, entered combat as an object of outright mockery: too heavy, too clumsy, too slow to climb. Yet by September 1943, it had become the Luftwaffe's unyielding nightmare, an unstoppable force in the dive, devastating in its firepower, and utterly immune to the horizontal dogfighting tactics that had once brought down every other Allied fighter. This profound transformation took a mere 48 hours to conceptualize, 30 days to demonstrably prove in the unforgiving skies, and 18 months to completely dominate the aerial battleground over Europe. Lieutenant Colonel Hub Zemke, in his final interview, before his passing in 1994, concisely summarized the monumental lesson: we didn't wait for a better airplane. We didn't complain about what we had. We studied the problem, found the solution, and implemented it immediately. In 48 hours, we turned failure into success. That's not about aircraft. That's about thinking. The Germans were better pilots with more experience, but they kept fighting the same way. Because that's how fighter combat had always been done. We changed everything. Because we had to. And that made all the difference. The P-47 would ultimately fly over 546000 combat sorties, destroy more than 7,000 enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground, and critically help achieve the complete air superiority that made D-Day and the Allied victory in Europe possible. But the genesis of all this began with just 3 men, a wall covered with stark photos of failures, and 48 hours of brilliant, desperate, game-changing thinking. The lesson transcends World War II. Superior technology means nothing without superior tactics. Traditional doctrine means nothing when it no longer works. And sometimes the greatest victories spring not from building better weapons, but from learning to wield the weapons you possess with more intelligence and audacity than your adversary. In July 1943, German pilots scoffed at the ungainly American fighters slowly climbing towards them. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to those who had truly learned that the secret of the Thunderbolt wasn't turning. It was falling.